The first time Lisa mentioned taking night classes, I barely registered it. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the hum of the dishwasher filling the silence between us. She sipped her wine, casually mentioning that her company was offering tuition reimbursement for employees pursuing certifications. "It'll help me move up the ladder," she said, her face lit with ambition. "Sounds great," I replied, genuinely supportive. That's what a good husband does, right? Encourages his wife to chase her dreams. The changes came gradually, too subtle to raise alarms. At first, it was just one night a week, then two, then entire weekends dedicated to studying. I noticed the shift in her demeanor, distraction creeping into our conversations, fewer affectionate touches, a colder edge to her voice. Still, I trusted her. Then came the tuition bill. It was a Friday night, and Lisa had asked me to pay it since she'd been so swamped with assignments. She handed me her laptop, logged into the payment portal. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I stared at the screen. The amount didn't make sense. "How much is the course again?" I asked casually. "Not much, just a basic certification," she said, her eyes fixed on her phone. The number on the screen wasn't enough for a basic certification. It was less than I'd spent on a weekend work seminar last year. Something about it gnawed at me, but I didn't press further. Not yet. Later that night, as Lisa slept soundly beside me, her laptop beckoned from the desk. My gut told me to look, and this time I listened. Her email was still logged in. I wasn't prepared for what I found. The messages weren't hidden, just buried beneath mundane exchanges about schedules and coursework. They started innocently enough. Jokes about her workload, compliments from someone signed Professor D. But as I scrolled further back, the tone shifted. "Last night was incredible. Can't wait for another study session. You looked amazing in that dress. Wish I could have taken it off myself." My hands gripped the edges of the laptop, knuckles white. Lisa wasn't taking night classes. She was taking me for a fool. I closed the laptop softly, my mind racing. Anger surged through me, but I tamped it down. I needed more than rage. I needed proof, a plan. Tomorrow, I'd start gathering both. The morning after I found the emails, I stared at Lisa over breakfast, my spoon stirring cold cereal I had no intention of eating. She looked radiant, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. She hummed a song under her breath as she buttered her toast, her hair still damp from the shower. How many mornings had I looked at her like this, thinking I was the luckiest man alive? Now, I couldn't stop replaying her emails in my head, each line a dagger lodged deeper into my chest. I wanted to demand answers, scream at her until she broke down and admitted everything. But something stopped me, the sheer audacity of her betrayal. She didn't just cheat. She lied, manipulated, and carried on as if nothing had changed. It wasn't just her actions that hurt. It was the fact that she let me believe we were fine. Betrayal is a funny thing. It doesn't just make you question the person who wronged you. It makes you question yourself. How had I not seen the signs? Was I too trusting, too blind? "You okay?" Lisa's voice broke through my thoughts. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." She nodded, unconcerned, and went back to scrolling through her phone. The sight of her so nonchalant made me sick. She was messaging him, wasn't she? Right in front of me. I excused myself, retreating to the bathroom to steady my nerves. Standing in front of the mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back. His jaw was tight, his eyes hollow. What is it about betrayal that cuts so deep? I think it's the fact that it's always personal. You let someone into your life, into your heart, and they take that trust, the most fragile gift you can offer, and they crush it without a second thought. I splashed cold water on my face and gripped the sink, my mind churning. Lisa's emails weren't just evidence of her infidelity. They were a window into the nature of temptation. She had always been ambitious, always chasing something just out of reach. Was that what he represented? A way to feel powerful, desired, alive? Did I do this? Had I become too predictable, too comfortable? No. I stopped myself mid-thought. This wasn't on me. I wasn't the one sneaking off to study sessions and sending flirty messages. I wasn't the one who shattered trust like it was a disposable commodity. By the time I left the bathroom, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not while I was still raw. Not while I was so close to losing control. Instead, I'd watch. For the next few days, I played the role of the clueless husband. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings, asked about her classes in the evenings, and even feigned interest when she rattled off vague descriptions of her coursework. All the while, I was piecing together her lies. She wasn't just betraying me with this Professor D. She was testing the limits of how far she could push me, how much I'd overlook. One night, while she was in the shower, I checked her phone. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages. She had deleted most of them, but a few scraps remained. Can't wait for our next session. You always make me feel so alive. Alive. The word burned itself into my brain. Was that what I had failed to give her? I put the phone down, my heart pounding. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Lisa wasn't the woman I thought she was. She didn't just betray me. She betrayed the life we built together. And I wasn't about to let her get away with it. I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to make sure she felt the weight of her choices. By the time I climbed into bed that night, I wasn't the same man I had been just days before. I was someone else entirely. Someone who wasn't going to let betrayal define him. They say betrayal is a knife in the back, but that's not quite right. It's slower than that, more insidious. It's a whisper you ignore, a flicker of doubt you convince yourself is nothing. It's 1,000 small cuts until one day you're bleeding out and don't know how it started. In the days after I discovered Lisa's emails, my mind became a battlefield. Memories of our life together replayed like a cruel montage. Every shared laugh, every tender moment now tainted. I found myself dissecting her every word, every action, wondering what was real and what was part of the lie. When did it start? Was it during our anniversary dinner, when she barely touched her wine and kept glancing at her phone? Or the time she came home late, claiming her study group ran over? I'd smiled and told her I was proud of her dedication. What a joke. The worst part wasn't just what she did. It was the realization that she didn't respect me enough to cover her tracks. She'd left breadcrumbs everywhere. The emails, the vague excuses, the tuition that didn't add up. It was like she wanted to get caught, or worse, she thought I was too stupid to notice. I wasn't stupid. I was patient. I spent hours poring over her emails, piecing together the timeline of her betrayal. It wasn't hard. She wasn't exactly subtle. Their relationship had started months ago, around the time she'd first mentioned night classes. The emails painted a picture of her slipping into temptation, of her excitement at the thrill of the forbidden. I can't stop thinking about last night, she wrote in one message. Me neither, he replied. You're intoxicating. Intoxicating. That word rattled around in my skull. I used to think she felt that way about me. The emails revealed more than just their affair. They exposed a version of Lisa I didn't recognize. She wasn't just a cheater. She was deliberate, calculating. She described their sessions with a coyness that made me nauseous, as if their deceit was something to be proud of. But buried between the flirtations, there were glimpses of insecurity. Do you ever think about what happens if someone finds out? She asked in one email. You worry too much, he reassured her. No one's going to find out. He was wrong. Despite the anger and humiliation, I couldn't help but wonder what had driven her to this. Was I not enough? Was our life not enough? I hated myself for even entertaining those questions, for taking on guilt that wasn't mine to carry. But that's the twisted logic of betrayal. It makes you question your own worth. I couldn't let her see the cracks in me, though. That's what she and her professor hadn't counted on. How much I could endure without breaking. At night, I'd lie awake next to her, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing. She seemed so peaceful, so unaware of the storm brewing beside her. I wondered if she ever felt guilty, if she ever thought about the man she'd vowed to love and honor. Or had she convinced herself that her actions were justified? One evening, as we sat on the couch, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it quickly and set it face down on the coffee table. Who's that? I asked, keeping my tone light. Oh, just a study buddy, she said, not even bothering to look me in the eye. I smiled, pretending to accept her answer, even as my chest tightened. That was the thing about Lisa. She lied so easily, so naturally. It made me wonder how many times she'd lied before, and I'd missed it. Betrayal is more than an act. It's a choice. Every lie, every message, every rendezvous with her professor was a choice to put her desires above our marriage. Above me. But now, I was making my own choices. And soon, she'd have to face them. Lisa might have thought she was in control, but she underestimated me. I wasn't just a victim in her game. I was the one writing the ending. Living with someone who's betraying you is like standing in a house you've lived in for years and suddenly realizing the walls have shifted. Everything feels off, even the air, like it's heavier somehow. That's how it felt with Lisa. Every smile, every kiss, every casual laugh. It all felt counterfeit now, like I was watching a badly rehearsed play. I couldn't decide which version of her was real. Was it the Lisa I'd fallen in love with? The woman who used to stay up late planning our future, dreaming of the life we were building together? Or was it this new Lisa, the one sending flirty messages to another man, sneaking out of our bed to meet him under the guise of night classes? The worst part was how normal she acted. She still asked me how my day was, still made jokes about the neighbor's noisy dog, still left post-it notes on the fridge reminding me to buy milk. If she felt even a shred of guilt, she hid it well. One night, as I watched her scroll through Netflix, casually debating which rom-com to put on, I wondered what she would do if I brought it up. Would she deny it? Cry? Apologize? Or had she already rehearsed her excuses, ready to turn the blame on me? I didn't ask. Not yet. Instead, I started noticing every little thing she did. I watched how she'd pull out her phone, her thumb hovering just long enough to check a message before setting it down again, always face down. I noticed how she'd go silent in the evenings, claiming to be reading, but her eyes never lingered on the same page for more than a minute. Even her perfume felt like a betrayal. Lisa didn't wear perfume often, but lately, she'd started spritzing it on before leaving for her classes. It was subtle, light enough to miss if you weren't paying attention, but now I was paying attention to everything. Temptation. It's a slippery word, isn't it? It makes betrayal sound inevitable, as if it's a force too powerful to resist. But temptation isn't an excuse, it's a choice. Lisa chose to entertain those flirty emails, chose to meet him in some dimly lit office, chose to come home to me afterward and pretend everything was fine. Did she think I wouldn't notice? Or worse, did she think I wouldn't care? I started second-guessing everything, even the memories that used to make me smile. That weekend trip to the mountains last spring. Had she already started emailing him by then? The night, she surprised me with my favorite dinner. Was it guilt driving her? I'd always believed trust was the foundation of any relationship. Without it, what were we? Just two people sharing a mortgage? A bed? Betrayal doesn't just break trust. It breaks you. It pulls the rug out from under your feet and leaves you standing in a void, wondering if anything was ever real. One night, while Lisa was asleep, I sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey, staring at the emails I'd printed out. I read them over and over, trying to understand how the woman I love could write words like these to someone else. Last night was incredible. I feel like a different person around you. I thought about those words for hours. Was that why she did it? Did she want to feel like a different person? Did she feel trapped in the life we'd built together? The life I thought made her happy? A part of me wanted to confront her right then, to shake her awake and demand answers. But another part of me, the part that was sharper, colder, knew better. If Lisa was playing a game, I wasn't going to be her pawn. Instead, I was going to wait, watch, and make sure that when the time came, she wouldn't have a single move left. Silence can be loud. It fills the spaces where words should be. And in the weeks following my discovery, it became my constant companion. I didn't bring up the emails, didn't confront Lisa, didn't give her any reason to suspect I knew. But the silence between us was deafening. Lisa didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did, but she chalked it up to stress or exhaustion, excuses I was sure she'd leaned on before. If she felt the weight of her betrayal pressing down on our home, she hid it well. On the other hand, felt every ounce of it. Some nights, as I lay beside her in bed, I'd find myself staring at the ceiling, wondering how it had come to this. When did we stop being us? Was it gradual, like erosion, or had it been sudden, a single decision that shattered everything? It's strange how betrayal makes you question your own reality. I started replaying moments in my mind, trying to pinpoint where it all went wrong. The last time she told me she loved me. Did she mean it? The way her hand used to linger on mine. Was that genuine, or had she already started pulling away? There was no clear answer, and the uncertainty was its own kind of torture. I began keeping track of her every move. Not out of jealousy. I wasn't interested in competing with the professor. No, this was about control, about taking back what little power I had left. If Lisa thought she could deceive me, she needed to know I wasn't as blind as she believed. One evening, she left for one of her study sessions. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I got in mine and followed. I kept a safe distance, heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and dread. She didn't go to the campus like she claimed. Instead, she drove to a small office building on the outskirts of downtown. The parking lot was nearly empty, the building dark except for a single lit window on the second floor. I parked far enough away to stay hidden, watching as she stepped out of her car. She had dressed up, heels, makeup, even that faint spritz of perfume I recognized but hadn't smelled in weeks. She didn't hesitate as she walked toward the building, her silhouette sharp against the dim streetlights. I waited. It took everything in me not to storm inside, not to confront her and this professor in the moment. But I wasn't ready yet. Confrontation wasn't enough. I needed something more. Something that would make her feel the same devastation she'd inflicted on me. When she finally returned home that night, I was already in bed, pretending to sleep. She climbed in quietly, her movements cautious, as if she didn't want to disturb me. The audacity of it all. The next morning, I caught her in the kitchen, sipping coffee as sunlight streamed through the window. She looked peaceful, content even. It made my stomach churn. "How was class last night?" I asked casually, leaning against the counter. She didn't miss a beat. "Good. A little overwhelming, but I'm keeping up." I nodded, hiding the anger bubbling beneath my skin. Her lie was so smooth, so practiced. She'd become an expert at deception, and I wondered how long it had been like this. Her lying, me believing, both of us pretending. The thing about trust is that it's invisible until it breaks. When it's gone, every interaction becomes a game of shadows and suspicion. Every glance, every word feels loaded with meaning, even if it isn't. But I wasn't going to let her lies consume me. No, if Lisa thought she could keep up this charade, she was mistaken. Because the silence between us wasn't just empty anymore. It was a countdown. And when the clock hit 0, she wouldn't see it coming. The human face is a delicate mask. It hides so much, a fleeting doubt, a rush of guilt, or, in Lisa's case, a web of deception spun so tightly it was starting to crack. I began noticing it more as the days passed. She wasn't as smooth as she thought. Her stories started overlapping, minor details slipping through the cracks. One night, she told me her professor had assigned a major group project due the following week. 2 days later, she claimed the same professor was preparing them for their final exam, and group work wasn't on the agenda. "Oh," I said when she slipped up. "I thought you were working on a group project?" Her eyes darted to me for a fraction of a second before she smiled, a tight, forced smile. But plans changed. He said we should focus on the exam instead." She recovered quickly, but that moment lingered in the air, unspoken but heavy. It was the first time I saw something resembling fear flicker across her face. And I liked it, not because I wanted her to suffer, although part of me did, but because it confirmed what I already knew. She wasn't just lying. She was scared I'd find out. That fear told me I was getting close, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining control. Her routine became more erratic after that. She stayed out later, claiming she needed extra time to prepare for her finals. She avoided eye contact more often, her phone always within arm's reach. At night, I'd hear her typing on her laptop after she thought I was asleep. I started imagining what she might be writing. More flirtations with the professor, perhaps, or maybe desperate attempts to keep their story straight. I pictured her face illuminated by the glow of the screen, a mixture of excitement and dread etched into her features. It was strange how much time I spent thinking about her thoughts. I'd always considered myself an introspective person, but now my introspection was consumed by her. Her choices, her lies, her motivations. I wanted to understand, even as part of me knew I never fully would. I once read that betrayal is the only wound inflicted by someone you love that doesn't heal with time. Instead, it festers, burrowing deeper into your psyche until it consumes everything else. Maybe that's why I couldn't let it go. Not yet. One evening, I decided to test her. I'd been thinking about it for days, carefully crafting a scenario that would seem harmless, but might force her hand. "Hey," I said over dinner, "I've been meaning to check out the campus where you've been taking classes. I thought maybe I'd swing by this weekend. Get a feel for the place." Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. It was subtle, a split-second pause, but I caught it. She quickly recovered, chewing her bite and swallowing before answering. Yeah," she said, her tone measured. "It's nothing special. Just a small classroom setup. Not much to see." "I'm sure it's fine," I said, smiling. "I'd still like to see where you've been spending so much time." For the first time in weeks, I saw a crack in her mask. Her hand fidgeted with the edge of her napkin, and her eyes darted to her phone, as if it held the answer to her predicament. "I don't know," she said after a moment. "It's not really open to visitors. Security is tight. You'd probably get bored." The excuse was flimsy, but I let it hang in the air, deliberately holding her gaze. "Maybe," I said lightly, as if I didn't care. "Just thought it'd be nice to see the place." "But if it's a hassle," she relaxed visibly, her shoulders dropping as she forced a laugh. "Yeah, it's not really worth the trip. Trust me." Trust me. That phrase cut deeper than she realized. That night, as Lisa slept, I pulled out the folder where I kept everything. The printed emails, the screenshots, the notes I'd taken. She was losing control of her story, and I was tightening mine. Every lie she told became another thread I could pull, unraveling the illusion she'd worked so hard to maintain. Soon, there would be nothing left but the truth, raw and undeniable. And when that moment came, I wouldn't just confront her. I'd destroy the entire facade. There's a moment when betrayal stops being a wound and starts becoming a weapon. For weeks, I'd let Lisa's lies swirl around me, piercing deeper with every word she spoke. But something inside me had shifted. The pain, the confusion, they were still there, but now they were tools. Sharp edges I could use. I had watched her long enough, endured her deception with the patience of a hunter stalking prey. Now, I was ready to strike. The emails, the discrepancies, the details she didn't realize she'd slipped. I had everything I needed. But I wasn't interested in a quiet confrontation. No whispered accusations over the dinner table or late-night arguments in hushed tones. No, Lisa's betrayal deserved something louder, something permanent. She had one last study session before her so-called final exam, and I knew exactly where she'd be. That night, I sat in the car parked across from the small office building she always went to. The place was as nondescript as her lies. A simple brick structure with a few dim lights and a parking lot that rarely had more than a handful of cars. I watched as Lisa arrived, stepping out of her car in heels that clicked against the pavement. Her hair was styled, her makeup carefully applied, not the look of a woman heading into a grueling study session. She glanced around briefly, as if checking for something or someone before disappearing inside. I waited. The minutes dragged on, each one stretching thin with tension. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, a steady drumbeat of anger, anticipation, and something I couldn't quite name. When enough time had passed, I grabbed the folder from the passenger seat and stepped out into the cool night air. The building's front door was unlocked, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights greeted me as I entered. The place smelled faintly of coffee and cheap air freshener. I followed the light on the second floor, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. My grip tightened on the folder as I reached the door. I didn't knock. I swung the door open, and there they were. Lisa sat perched on the edge of a desk, her legs crossed, leaning slightly toward him. Professor D. He was mid-sentence, gesturing with a hand, but they both froze as the door slammed against the wall. For a moment, no one spoke. The air in the room turned electric, crackling with shock and unspoken words. Lisa's face went pale. "What are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I ignored her, and looked directly at him. He was younger than I expected, with a neatly trimmed beard and the kind of smug expression that made my blood boil. "Nice to finally meet you," I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. I tossed the folder onto the desk, the papers spilling out like a flood of truth. "You might want to read those." Lisa's eyes darted to the folder, then back to me. "What is this?" "It's everything," I said, my tone colder than I thought possible. "All your emails. Every lie. Every detail of your little study sessions." Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for words, but none came. Professor D reached for the papers, his face darkening as he skimmed the contents. He looked up at Lisa, then at me, his confidence visibly crumbling. "Look," he started, raising a hand as if to calm me. "This isn't what it looks like." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Save it. I'm not here for you." I turned to Lisa, who still hadn't moved. "I trusted you," I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to stay composed. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" She didn't deny it. She didn't cry. She just stared at me, her expression a mix of shame and resignation. I pulled the divorce papers from my jacket and placed them on the desk next to the emails. "You can keep him," I said. "You deserve each other." With that, I turned and walked out. Behind me, I heard her call my name, her voice weak and uncertain. I didn't stop. Some betrayals don't deserve closure. I drove home in silence, the weight of the evening pressing down on me like a lead blanket. The folder was lighter now, its contents left behind as evidence. But the emotional weight of it, the betrayal, the confrontation, remained. I'd imagined this moment 100 different ways. Some scenarios had Lisa begging for forgiveness. Others had her erupting in anger, trying to shift the blame onto me. But the reality had been far quieter. No shouting, no excuses. Just her stunned silence. And that silence was louder than anything she could have said. By the time I reached home, my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was wearing off, replaced by exhaustion and a raw ache that seeped into my bones. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the front door of the house we'd built together. How many times had I walked through that door, believing this place was safe, that it was ours? Now it felt like a facade, a shell housing memories that no longer felt real. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. I dropped my keys on the counter and sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the darkened TV screen. My mind raced, replaying the confrontation over and over, analyzing every word, every expression. I thought it would feel like victory, exposing her lies, watching her world collapse under the weight of her own choices. But all I felt was hollow, because betrayal isn't just about the act itself. It's about what it takes from you. The trust, the love, the belief that you knew someone, that they knew you. It's a theft, and no amount of retribution can ever fully replace what's been stolen. I leaned forward, burying my face in my hands. For weeks, I'd been consumed by the need to act, to prove I wasn't blind, to take control of the narrative she'd been weaving behind my back. But now that it was done, all I felt was loss. Not just the loss of her, but the loss of the person I used to be, the man who believed in her. A knock at the door startled me out of my thoughts. For a moment, I didn't move, hoping whoever it was would go away. But the knock came again, more insistent this time. I opened the door to find Lisa standing there, her makeup smeared, her hair disheveled. She looked smaller somehow, her usual confidence stripped away. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling. I stepped aside, letting her in more out of habit than anything else. She walked into the living room and stood there, arms wrapped around herself like a shield. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she began, her eyes fixed on the floor. I laughed bitterly. "You didn't mean for it to happen? You mean you tripped and fell into his arms?" She flinched but didn't argue. I was lonely," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "You've been so distant lately, so predictable. And Stop," I said, my voice sharp. "Don't you dare make this about me. Don't you dare stand there and act like I pushed you into this." Her eyes finally met mine, glistening with unshed tears. "I'm not saying it's your fault," she said. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I echoed, incredulous. "No, Lisa. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. What you did was deliberate. It was a choice. Over and over again, you chose to lie, to cheat, to destroy everything we had." She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. "Save it. I don't want your apologies. I don't want your explanations. It's too late for that." For a moment, we just stood there, the space between us a chasm that couldn't be bridged. "I'll sign the papers," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good," I replied, my tone cold. "Because there's nothing left to say." She nodded, her shoulders slumping as she turned and walked toward the door. As I watched her leave, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, anger, sadness. But above all, I felt free. The house was quiet again, but this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like a blank canvas, waiting for me to start over. The first morning without Lisa felt like stepping into a new world, one I hadn't asked for, but one I was forced to navigate. Her side of the bed was empty, her coffee cup no longer cluttering the kitchen counter. The air felt different, lighter yet tinged with the bittersweet ache of endings. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers she'd signed the night before. Her neat, practiced signature was there, right next to mine, finalizing the undoing of years we'd spent together. It was done. I should have felt a sense of victory. After weeks of plotting, watching, and waiting, I confronted her, exposed the truth, and walked away with my dignity intact, or at least what was left of it. But all I felt was the weight of the aftermath. Trust isn't just a bridge between two people. It's the foundation of how you see the world. When it breaks, the cracks spread everywhere. The first few days, I kept myself busy, tackling every task I could think of to avoid sitting alone with my thoughts. I cleaned out closets, fixed a broken kitchen drawer I'd been ignoring for months, and even trimmed the hedges in the backyard. Anything to keep my hands moving and my mind occupied. But at night, when the distractions faded and the house grew silent, the memories crept in. I found myself replaying the moment I opened the door to that office building. Her stunned expression burned into my mind. Part of me had wanted her to fight, to try and salvage what we had. Instead, she crumbled, and I was left holding the pieces of something I couldn't fix. Had she ever loved me the way I loved her? Or was I just the safe option, the predictable husband who could be left behind when something more exciting came along? That thought was the hardest to shake. One evening, while going through the dresser we'd once shared, I found an old photo of us from our honeymoon. We were on a beach, both of us grinning like we didn't have a care in the world. I barely recognized myself in the picture, so full of hope, so sure of the life we were building. I stared at the photo for a long time, wondering how we'd gone from that moment to this. When had things started to fall apart? And why hadn't I seen it coming? The answer, I realized, wasn't simple. Betrayal isn't a single act. It's the culmination of 1,000 tiny cracks, each one widening over time until the whole structure collapses. I'd been so focused on building a life with Lisa that I hadn't noticed her slipping away. And maybe she hadn't noticed either, at least not at first. Temptation didn't destroy us. Distance did, but that didn't absolve her. She made the choice to betray me instead of reaching for me. The next morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, studying my reflection. For weeks, I'd felt like a stranger in my own life, a passive observer in the story of my own betrayal. But now, I saw something else, a spark of resilience beneath the weariness. Lisa had broken my trust, shattered the life we'd built together. But she hadn't destroyed me. I was still standing, still breathing, still capable of rebuilding. And that realization, more than anything else, felt like the first step forward. I folded the photo of us and placed it in a drawer, not out of anger, but as a way of letting go. The chapter with Lisa was over, but my story wasn't. I didn't know what the future held, whether it would be messy, lonely, or something better than I'd ever imagined. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Because trust, while fragile, isn't irreparable. And though I'd lost trust in her, I was beginning to find it in myself. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes after the storm, a quiet where the wreckage settles, and you finally begin to see the outlines of what's left. That's where I found myself in the weeks following Lisa's departure. At first, the silence in the house felt unbearable. Every room carried the ghost of her, a laugh in the kitchen, a whispered joke in the hallway, her perfume lingering on the edge of our shared space. But over time, the silence changed. It stopped being an absence and started feeling like possibility. I wasn't just alone anymore. I was free. One day, I decided to clean out the rest of Lisa's things. She'd taken what she wanted when she left, leaving behind only the items that didn't fit into her new life. Old sweaters, photo albums, and a few trinkets we'd collected on trips together. As I sorted through the items, I came across a small box labeled Memories. Inside were ticket stubs from movies we'd seen, postcards from places we'd visited, and a stack of handwritten notes. I hesitated before reading them, unsure if I could handle the rawness of it. But curiosity won out. The notes were simple, scribbled messages we'd left for each other over the years. Good luck on your big meeting today. I know you'll crush it. Thanks for being my rock. I love you more than words can say. Don't forget to pick up milk. Also, you're amazing. I laughed bitterly at that last one, the simplicity of it stinging more than it should have. These notes were from a version of Lisa who believed in us, who saw me as her partner, her equal. What changed? The question burned in my mind, but I knew it didn't matter anymore. Dwelling on what went wrong wouldn't change the past, and it certainly wouldn't help me build a future. I put the box back in the closet, deciding it didn't need to be thrown away. At least not yet. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild. It wasn't dramatic, no grand gestures or life-altering epiphanies. It was small things like cooking meals for myself instead of ordering takeout, going for morning runs to clear my head, and reconnecting with friends I'd drifted away from during my marriage. I also started therapy, something I'd never considered before. At first, it felt strange, sitting in a room with a stranger and spilling my deepest insecurities. But over time, it became a lifeline. My therapist helped me see something I hadn't been willing to admit. Lisa's betrayal wasn't about me. It wasn't a reflection of my worth or what I did or didn't give her. It was about her choices, her inability to confront her own unhappiness without dragging someone else down with her. That realization was both freeing and devastating. It freed me from the burden of self-blame, but it also meant I had to accept that the woman I loved wasn't the person I thought she was. One evening, I took a walk along the same park trail Lisa and I had visited often. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, and the air was crisp with the scent of autumn. As I walked, I thought about forgiveness, not for Lisa, but for myself, forgiving myself for not seeing the signs sooner, for staying when I should have asked harder questions, for holding on to something that had been slipping away for years. By the time I reached the end of the trail, I felt lighter. Not fixed. Grief and betrayal don't work that way, but lighter. Healing isn't linear, and trust doesn't magically rebuild itself overnight. But as I stood there, watching the last sliver of sunlight dip below the horizon, I realized something. Endings aren't always just endings. They're beginnings too. Lisa's betrayal might have broken something in me, but it also forced me to grow. It taught me to value myself, to see the cracks in my own armor and begin the slow, painful process of mending them. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.